The year is 1863, and the American Civil War rages, a maelstrom of blood and iron tearing the nation apart. But even amidst such unprecedented violence, some moments stand out for their sheer desperation, their critical stakes, and the profound mystery of how they might be resolved. Imagine, if you can, tens of thousands of Union soldiers, not on a triumphant march, but trapped, isolated, their backs against the Tennessee River, with the enemy perched menacingly on the towering heights all around them. Their supplies are dwindling, their horses are dying, and the specter of starvation looms larger with each passing day. The very air they breathe is thick with the dust of despair and the acrid smoke of Confederate campfires. How did they get here? And more importantly, how could they possibly escape? This is the story of Chattanooga, a name that would become synonymous with both utter catastrophe and miraculous deliverance. A place where the fate of the Western theater and perhaps the entire Union cause hung by the thinnest of threads. For months, the Western theater had been a crucible of intense, often brutal campaigning. In late June 1863, Major General William Rosecrans, commanding the Union Army of the Cumberland, had embarked on the Tullahoma campaign, a series of skillful maneuvers that forced the Confederate Army of Tennessee, led by General Braxton Bragg, to abandon Middle Tennessee and fall back into Georgia. Rosecrans' ultimate objective was Chattanooga, Tennessee, a prize of immense strategic value. This city, nestled in southeastern Tennessee, was not merely a dot on a map. It was a vital transportation hub, a critical junction for several railroads that connected the major Southern arsenals and served as a crucial supply line for both Union and Confederate forces. Control of Chattanooga meant control of the routes leading directly into the Deep South, effectively splitting the Confederacy and paving the way for further Union advances. Rosecrans' initial campaign was a masterclass in maneuver, compelling Bragg to evacuate Chattanooga on September 9, 1863, without a major battle. The Union had achieved its immediate goal. But the triumph was short-lived for Bragg, reinforced by divisions from Mississippi under General Bushrod Johnson, and troops from the Army of Northern Virginia under Lieutenant General James Longstreet, was not yet defeated. He intended to strike back, and he chose his ground carefully. Just south of Chattanooga, in the woods and hills of northern Georgia, near West Chickamauga Creek, the two armies would collide. The Battle of Chickamauga, fought from September 18 to September 20, 1863, would prove to be one of the bloodiest engagements of the entire war. Across 2 days, the conflict raged in a tangled, dense forest, leading to horrific casualties on both sides. The Union suffered more than 16,000 killed, wounded, or missing, while the Confederates sustained over 18,000 casualties from their roughly 68,000 men. Only Gettysburg would prove deadlier. On the second day of the battle, a mistaken order created a gap in the Union line. Longstreet's powerful assault poured through, shattering a significant portion of the Army of the Cumberland and sending it into a headlong, panicked retreat. Amidst this chaos, one Union commander, Major General George H. Thomas, earned an enduring nickname. As the main body of the Union Army gave way, Thomas skillfully organized a desperate defense on Snodgrass Hill and Horseshoe Ridge, holding off repeated Confederate assaults and preventing a total rout. His determination saved the Army of the Cumberland from complete destruction, earning him the moniker, the Rock of Chickamauga. Thomas's stand allowed the remnants of Rosecrans' army to retreat to the relative safety of Chattanooga. But safety was a deceptive term. Bragg's victorious Confederate army, though battered, followed close behind. They took up positions on the commanding heights surrounding the city, Lookout Mountain to the southwest and Missionary Ridge to the east. From these natural fortresses, the Confederates effectively laid siege to Chattanooga, blocking all major roads and railways and cutting off traffic on the Tennessee River. The Union forces were trapped, encircled, and their situation grew more desperate with each passing day. Inside Chattanooga, the conditions rapidly deteriorated. Rosecrans, described by President Lincoln as confused and stunned like a duck hit in the head after Chickamauga, struggled with his command and showed little willingness to take decisive action. Supplies, which had been adequate before the siege, quickly ran low. The sole remaining supply road was tenuous and constantly threatened by Confederate cavalry. By late October, typical Federal soldiers, rations had dwindled to a mere 4 cakes of hard bread and a quarter pound of pork every 3 days. Horses and mules, essential for moving artillery and wagons, began to die by the thousands from starvation, their carcasses littering the roads. The men themselves were on the brink of starvation, their morale plummeting. The siege, imposed by General Braxton Bragg, was designed to starve the Union forces into surrender. Confederate Lieutenant General James Longstreet, critical of Bragg's strategy, remarked that they were trying to starve the enemy by investing him on the only side from which he could not have gathered supplies. The perilous situation in Chattanooga was not lost on Washington. President Abraham Lincoln and Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton understood the dire consequences of losing this vital stronghold. Chattanooga was a gateway, and if it fell, the Union's push into the heart of the Confederacy would be severely hampered, if not entirely halted. Major General Ulysses S. Grant, whose star had risen dramatically with his victories at Forts Henry and Donelson and, most recently, Vicksburg, was the man Lincoln increasingly turned to in moments of crisis. Grant, recovering from a dislocated hip after a fall from his horse in September, was in Vicksburg, Mississippi, when the orders came. On October 16, 1863, a new command was created, the Military Division of the Mississippi, encompassing all Union armies between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River. Grant was placed in charge, giving him unprecedented authority in the Western theater. One of his first and most critical directives was to address the catastrophe unfolding in Chattanooga. Secretary of War Stanton personally met Grant's train in Indianapolis to deliver the orders. Grant was given the option to replace the dispirited Rosecrans with Major General George H. Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga. Grant immediately exercised this option, relieving Rosecrans and putting Thomas in command of the Army of the Cumberland. Thomas's response to the order to hold Chattanooga was resolute. "We will hold the town till we starve." This was not a statement of despair, but of grim determination. Grant himself arrived in Chattanooga on October 23, 1863, after an arduous journey that circumvented Confederate lines. Despite his recent injury, his presence alone began to inject a much-needed sense of confidence and purpose into the beleaguered Union forces. As one soldier remarked, "You have no conception of the change in the army when Grant came. He opened the Cracker Line and got a steamer through. We began to see things move. We felt that everything came from a plan." Grant found that a plan to alleviate the supply crisis was already in motion. Brigadier General William F. Baldy Smith, the chief engineer of the Army of the Cumberland, had devised an ingenious solution, which Thomas had immediately begun to implement upon taking command. This plan, soon to be known as the Cracker Line, aimed to establish a new, secure supply route into the city. It involved securing Brown's Ferry on the Tennessee River, and linking it to Kelly's Ferry further west, a navigable point accessible by Union supply boats from Bridgeport, Alabama. Grant enthusiastically approved Smith's plan. On the night of October 26th, a force of Union soldiers, using flat-bottomed boats, silently moved down the Tennessee River, just under the Confederate guns on Lookout Mountain, to seize Brown's Ferry. This daring amphibious operation caught the Confederates by surprise. On October 27th, Union forces secured Brown's Ferry. This was quickly followed by an advance of Major General Joseph Hooker's the 11th and the 12th Corps, who had been dispatched from the Army of the Potomac and were arriving from Bridgeport, Alabama. Hooker's men marched through Lookout Valley to link up with the troops at Brown's Ferry. However, the Confederates were not blind to these maneuvers. General Braxton Bragg, enraged by the Union's success in establishing the Cracker Line, ordered Lieutenant General James Longstreet to launch a counterattack. On the night of October 28th and into the early hours of October 29, 1863, the Battle of Wauhatchie erupted, one of the few battles of the Civil War fought almost entirely in the dark. Longstreet's Confederates attacked Hooker's forces in Lookout Valley, attempting to sever the newly established supply route. Despite the ferocity of the night attack and initial disorganization on both sides, the Union forces under Hooker successfully repulsed the Confederates. The Cracker Line held. The opening of this supply line was a profound turning point. Within a week of Grant's arrival and the establishment of the Cracker Line, supplies began flowing steadily into Chattanooga. Steamboats and barges like the Chattanooga began delivering crucial rations, ammunition, and forage for the starving animals. The change was immediate and dramatic. Soldiers who had been on quarter rations were soon receiving full sustenance. The sight of the supply boats, carrying coffee and sowbelly, brought cheers from the Union troops, a powerful psychological boost after weeks of despair. As one soldier exclaimed, "The Cracker Line is open, full rations, boys, 3 cheers for the Cracker Line." The strategic situation had been completely transformed. Bragg knew the siege was effectively broken. His efforts to starve out the Union Army had failed. With the immediate threat of starvation lifted, Grant could now turn his attention from mere survival to offensive action. Reinforcements, including Major General William T. Sherman with his 20,000 men from the Army of the Tennessee, were now able to reach Chattanooga, having marched over 600 miles. By mid-November, Grant had assembled a combined force of approximately 60,000 men, integrating troops from the Army of the Cumberland, the Army of the Tennessee, and the Expeditionary Force from the Army of the Potomac. The stage was set for a dramatic reversal. The Union, once besieged and starving, was now reinforced, resupplied, and ready to fight. The Confederate grip on the commanding heights around Chattanooga, which had seemed so impregnable, was about to be challenged. What would happen next would unfold over 3 intense days, from November 23 to November 25, 1863, and would fundamentally reshape the course of the American Civil War in the Western theater. The questions of escape and survival had been answered. Now, the question of decisive victory loomed large. The stage was indeed set not merely for a battle, but for a complete reversal of fortunes, a testament to strategic brilliance and the unwavering resolve of Union soldiers. Grant's plan was audacious, designed to exploit Confederate weaknesses and the morale boost his own troops had recently experienced. The Confederate forces under General Braxton Bragg held what appeared to be impregnable positions. Missionary Ridge to the east, overlooking Chattanooga, and Lookout Mountain to the southwest, a formidable natural fortress. Bragg had deployed his army thinly across these commanding heights, believing the terrain itself would be his strongest ally. However, this dispersion, coupled with recent detachments of Confederate troops to reinforce Longstreet's campaign against Knoxville, had significantly weakened his lines. On November 23, 1863, the Union offensive began, not with a direct assault on the towering heights, but with a probing attack designed to feel out the enemy and, crucially, to distract Bragg from Grant's true intentions. Major General George H. Thomas's Army of the Cumberland, still smarting from their defeat at Chickamauga, moved out of their fortifications around Chattanooga. Their immediate objective was a seemingly minor elevation known as Orchard Knob, a detached hill positioned between the main Union lines and the imposing Confederate stronghold of Missionary Ridge. This move, initially conceived as a reconnaissance in force, quickly escalated into a full-scale engagement. The Union troops advanced in a magnificent formation, a parade ground spectacle that belied the deadly intent behind it. 4 divisions, some 14,000 men, stretched across a 2-mile front, their bayonets gleaming in the afternoon sun. Their advance was met with scattered skirmish fire, but the Confederates on Orchard Knob, outnumbered and isolated, were quickly overwhelmed. In a swift, decisive charge, Thomas's men surged forward, capturing the hill and pushing back the Confederate outposts. The seizure of Orchard Knob, while seemingly small in scale, was a critical first step. It provided the Union with a crucial forward observation post and a launching point for future assaults on Missionary Ridge. More importantly, it caught Bragg by surprise. He misinterpreted the action as the main Union thrust and began shifting his reserves, inadvertently weakening other sectors of his defense. The psychological impact of this initial success on the Union troops, after weeks of siege and the bitter memory of Chickamauga, was immense. Cheers erupted as the stars and stripes were unfurled atop Orchard Knob, a clear signal that the Union was no longer simply surviving but aggressively taking the fight to the enemy. The following day, November 24th, dawned shrouded in a thick, chilling fog, perfectly setting the stage for one of the most iconic battles of the war, the battle above the clouds on Lookout Mountain. Grant's true intention for this flank was to clear the mountain of its Confederate defenders and secure the supply route running along its base. Major General Joseph Hooker, leading a combined force of troops from the Army of the Potomac and the Army of the Cumberland, was tasked with this seemingly impossible feat. Lookout Mountain, rising some 1,100 feet above the valley floor, was a natural fortress, its steep, rocky slopes heavily fortified with breastworks and rifle pits, manned by Confederate General Carter Stevenson's division. Hooker's plan involved a flanking maneuver, exploiting the mountain's terrain rather than directly assaulting its most formidable face. His troops were to advance up the northern slopes, hidden by the dense fog, and sweep around the mountain's western flank, dislodging the Confederates from their positions. The Union advance began early in the morning. Troops from Major General Peter Osterhaus's division and Brigadier General John Geary's division, veterans of many campaigns, cautiously ascended the fog-shrouded slopes. The fog of war took on a literal meaning here, as visibility was often limited to a few yards, creating an eerie, almost surreal battlefield. The Confederates, caught off guard by the direction and ferocity of the assault, found their fortified positions rendered less effective by the Union's flanking movements. The battle became a series of intense skirmishes and desperate charges through thick underbrush, over rocky outcrops, and along precipitous ledges. Union soldiers, pushing ever higher, used the limited visibility to their advantage, often appearing suddenly out of the mist to engage bewildered Confederate defenders. The fighting was fierce, hand-to-hand in places, as both sides grappled for control of critical terrain. Artillery pieces, pulled by straining men and mules, were laboriously dragged up the treacherous slopes to provide fire support. The sheer physical exertion required to fight on such steep terrain, coupled with the psychological disorienting effects of the fog, made this a uniquely challenging engagement. By afternoon, the Union forces had successfully pushed the Confederates back, securing the nose of Lookout Mountain and establishing a line that effectively outflanked many of Bragg's remaining defenses. As the fog began to lift later in the day, the sight of Union flags waving from the summit and along the slopes of Lookout Mountain sent a powerful message to both armies. For the Union, it was a symbol of incredible achievement and renewed hope. For the Confederates, it was a devastating blow, a clear indication that their seemingly unassailable positions were, in fact, vulnerable. The battle above the clouds had not been a full-scale rout, but it had achieved its strategic objective. The Confederates were forced to abandon Lookout Mountain, retreating to the relative safety of Missionary Ridge. This forced withdrawal exposed Bragg's left flank and further complicated his already precarious defensive posture. The psychological pressure on the Confederate command was immense. Their grip on Chattanooga, once so tight, was now slipping. The first 2 days had unfolded with remarkable success for the Union. Orchard Knob provided a crucial foothold, and Lookout Mountain was cleared, securing flanks and opening vital lines of communication. Grant's strategy of probing, distracting, and then delivering decisive blows was working. The Confederates, increasingly disoriented and dispirited, were being systematically compressed onto Missionary Ridge. The stage was now truly set for the dramatic climax, a battle that would determine the fate of Chattanooga and significantly impact the Western theater of the war. The Union, with momentum on its side and an overwhelming sense of purpose, looked eastward towards Missionary Ridge, where Bragg's army, battered but still formidable, awaited their final challenge. The morning of November 25th would bring the decisive confrontation, a battle that would defy military expectations and etch itself into the annals of American history. The morning of November 25th dawned, heavy with the weight of expectation. Below Missionary Ridge, the Union forces stirred, their eyes fixed on the formidable heights where Bragg's Confederates awaited. General Grant's plan was audacious, yet seemingly straightforward. Major General William Tecumseh Sherman, commanding the Army of the Tennessee, was to launch the main assault against the northern end of Missionary Ridge, what was known as Tunnel Hill, attempting to turn the Confederate right flank. Simultaneously, Major General Joseph Hooker, with his corps from the Army of the Potomac now reinforced, would sweep up from Lookout Mountain, striking the Confederate left. The Army of the Cumberland, under Major General George Thomas, positioned at the center, was given a more limited objective: to advance from Orchard Knob and seize the Confederate rifle pits at the base of Missionary Ridge, then hold that position. This was intended to relieve pressure on Sherman's main attack and prevent the Confederates from shifting troops to counter him. Sherman's attack began early, but immediately encountered fierce resistance. What he believed to be the northern end of Missionary Ridge was, in fact, a detached hill, heavily fortified and defended by Confederate troops under Major General Patrick Cleburne. Cleburne's men, veterans of countless battles, fought with incredible tenacity, repelling wave after wave of Union assaults throughout the morning and early afternoon. The terrain itself proved a brutal obstacle, with steep wooded slopes and deep ravines hindering the Union advance. Despite repeated charges and heavy casualties, Sherman's forces struggled to gain significant ground, their efforts effectively stalemated by Cleburne's determined defense. The planned turning movement faltered, and the Confederates held their ground on their right flank. Meanwhile, Hooker, encountering delays in repairing a bridge over Chattanooga Creek that had been destroyed by the retreating Confederates, was slow to get into position. His forces, after their triumphant ascent of Lookout Mountain, finally managed to cross the creek and began their advance towards the southern end of Missionary Ridge. They met the Confederate left flank, under the command of Lieutenant General John C. Breckinridge, who had deployed his men in a tenuous line across the difficult terrain. Hooker's men, pushing forward, gradually began to gain traction, threatening to collapse Breckinridge's weakened flank. However, the coordinated pressure Grant envisioned was not materializing as quickly or as decisively as planned. As the afternoon wore on, Grant, observing the fierce but inconclusive fighting on Sherman's front from his vantage point on Orchard Knob, grew increasingly anxious. Sherman was taking heavy losses and not breaking through, and Hooker's advance was still developing. To prevent Bragg from reinforcing his right flank against Sherman, Grant issued orders for Thomas's Army of the Cumberland to advance and take the rifle pits at the base of Missionary Ridge. This was a limited objective, the diversionary attack. At approximately 3:30 p.m., a line of over 20,000 Union soldiers, stretching for nearly 3 miles, emerged from their positions and began their advance across the open ground towards the base of the ridge. The charge of the Army of the Cumberland was a sight to behold, a perfectly aligned blue wave advancing under a hail of Confederate artillery and rifle fire. They quickly overran the Confederate rifle pits at the base of the ridge, capturing hundreds of prisoners. But then, an extraordinary unplanned event unfolded. The Union soldiers, finding themselves exposed to a murderous fire from the main Confederate line, dug in atop the ridge, and fearing that retreating would be even more deadly, did not stop. Instead, without orders from their commanders, without a coherent plan, they began to climb Missionary Ridge. It was an impulsive, spontaneous surge born of self-preservation and an indomitable fighting spirit. Company by company, regiment by regiment, the men of the Army of the Cumberland, many of whom had suffered humiliation at Chickamauga just weeks before, started scaling the steep, rugged slopes. Their immediate commanders, initially stunned, soon realized that to order them back would be disastrous. They either joined the charge or desperately tried to maintain some semblance of order as their men surged upward. The Confederate defenses, while seemingly impregnable from a distance, harbored critical weaknesses. Bragg had committed a tactical blunder by placing many of his rifle pits at the base of the ridge, meaning the defenders on the crest could not fire down upon the attacking Union soldiers once they got too close to the base without hitting their own men. Furthermore, the trenches at the top were poorly constructed and offered inadequate cover. There were also too few artillery pieces positioned to effectively sweep the slopes with enfilading fire. As the Union soldiers scrambled upwards, often using hands and knees, they found numerous natural ravines and folds in the terrain that offered momentary cover from the plunging fire. The sheer audacity and unexpected nature of the assault bewildered the Confederate defenders. Generals on the ridge, including Bragg himself, watched in disbelief as the Union wave defied all military logic. The Confederate lines began to waver, then crack under the sustained, uncoordinated but relentless pressure. Officers frantically tried to rally their men, but the morale of many Confederate soldiers, already battered by the previous day's defeats, began to crumble. One by one, sections of the Confederate line broke. General Ulysses S. Grant, observing the incredible and unplanned ascent from Orchard Knob, initially demanded to know who had ordered the charge. When informed it was spontaneous, he reportedly remarked, "Whoever ordered those men up that ridge will be court-martialed if it doesn't succeed." But succeed it did. By late afternoon, Union flags were appearing along the crest of Missionary Ridge. The Confederates, their lines completely shattered, abandoned their positions and fled in disarray down the eastern slopes. Bragg's army, though not entirely destroyed, was decisively routed, retreating southward into Georgia, their grip on Chattanooga irretrievably lost. The Battle of Chattanooga, culminating in the stunning victory at Missionary Ridge, was a pivotal moment in the American Civil War. The Union had not only secured the vital rail hub of Chattanooga, but had also broken the Confederate stranglehold on eastern Tennessee, opening the gateway for future Union offensives deep into the heart of the Confederacy. Within days, Major General William T. Sherman led a force to relieve the besieged Union garrison at Knoxville, further solidifying Union control of the region and pushing back Confederate General James Longstreet's attempts to reclaim East Tennessee. For the Union, Chattanooga was a monumental triumph. It dramatically shifted the balance of power in the Western theater, proving that the Confederacy's most formidable natural defenses could be overcome. It instilled immense confidence in the Union troops, especially the Army of the Cumberland, who had redeemed themselves after Chickamauga. Most significantly, it propelled Ulysses S. Grant into the national spotlight as the Union's most successful general. His strategic brilliance, coolness under pressure, and ability to coordinate large-scale operations were undeniable. This victory, combined with Vicksburg earlier in the year, cemented his reputation and, within a few months, led to his promotion to lieutenant general and general-in-chief of all Union armies. For the Confederacy, Chattanooga was a devastating blow, both strategically and psychologically. They lost a critical logistical center and vital territory, further constricting their ability to wage war. The defeat exposed deep flaws in Confederate leadership, leading to the removal of General Braxton Bragg from command. More importantly, it severely demoralized the Southern troops and civilian population. The hope of a decisive victory in the West, which had flickered after Chickamauga, was extinguished. The road to Atlanta, and with it the heart of the Deep South, lay open to the Union. The legacy of the Chattanooga campaign reverberated throughout the remainder of the war. It set the stage for Sherman's relentless march to the sea, and his subsequent campaigns that would ultimately cripple the Confederacy's zest, will, and capacity to fight. With Grant directing the overall strategy, and Sherman executing the devastating Western offensives, the Union now possessed a coordinated, relentless war machine. The battles of Orchard Knob, Lookout Mountain, and Missionary Ridge demonstrated the adaptability, resilience, and sheer fighting power of the Union Army. The Civil War, ultimately, was a test of endurance, resources, and will. Chattanooga affirmed the Union's superior industrial might, its growing strategic prowess, and its unwavering commitment to preserving the nation. The sacrifices made on those Tennessee hills, the lives lost, and the courage displayed by soldiers on both sides became etched into the tapestry of American history. The Union victory at Chattanooga was not the end of the war, but it was a crucial turning point, a powerful testament to the Union's determination, and a clear sign that the Confederacy's days were numbered. The battle above the clouds and the extraordinary charge up Missionary Ridge remain enduring symbols of human courage, folly, and the relentless pursuit of victory that ultimately reunited a divided nation. The war would rage on for another year and a half, but after Chattanooga, the path to Appomattox became undeniably clearer, leading to the ultimate preservation of the United States.